Hello? Do we have sound? We do now. Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you so much. I see I'm running 3 minutes late, and I apologize for that, but just having a wonderful conversation with one of my favorite people, and one of your favorite people, Dennis Rush, a highly accomplished artist in wood. And he took a little project for me. He's doing a couple of projects and with walnut, and I'm just really excited to see what these look like. I'm not going to tell you what he's doing because you'll get jealous and you'll want him to do the same thing for you. And I don't want to put too much on him, but I really do appreciate his work. So maybe I'll tell you later. Who knows? Well, it's good to see you all, and I would like to recognize the fact that Carol from my office at State Farm is here. Thank you. And her friend Teresa Smith, thank you. Thank you for being here. And we have other visitors. We appreciate your coming and being with us. We always welcome visitors. Central Church of Christ for decades has been known as one of the friendliest churches in Warren County. And we just want to reinforce that reputation. If you come visit with us and you like us, we'll come visit again and again and again, and maybe you'll become a regular here, and we would very much appreciate that and would welcome you to our fellowship. Our country today was, again, deeply shocked and saddened by tragic violence against children in Minneapolis at the, I think it's the Ascension Catholic Church and their related parochial school. As you know, as I think we all know, unfortunately, 2 young lives, an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, were brutally taken by a gunman. The gunman died apparently of self-inflicted gunshot wound. And there's not a whole lot that we can do materially, but certainly I know that everyone in this auditorium and those following us on live streaming video will want to be in prayer for the victims, for the families of the victims, and all the others. The victimization doesn't stop in that immediate neighborhood. It radiates out. And we deeply grieve these things, and we're left to wonder why. Why do these things happen? And it's especially poignant for us here in Tennessee because we're coming up on the anniversary of the Covenant school shooting in Nashville. And it just reminds us that evil is stalking out there, and the defense we have, as I say, is the defense, and the offense really is prayer. Well, we're back in the book of Acts this evening, and we're making progress. Some people may despair that we'll ever get to the end of the book of Acts. I assure you we will, if the Lord lets us live that long and have reasonably good health and have our senses about us. But there's so much in the book of Acts. We're talking not only about the history of the primitive church, but the motivation that the early disciples had. And when we talk about motivation, I think the picture in the dictionary, if you look it up, next to motivation would be the Apostle Paul. He was motivated. He was driven. He wasn't one to give up easily. And I think there's a lesson for us, maybe an unspoken lesson, but definitely a very loud and clear message about perseverance in the face of adversity. If Paul had given up easily, he probably would have done so early in his missionary work, because it seems like when we read the book of Acts, everywhere he turns, there are people against him. Well, sure, there are a lot of very sincere Christians who love to hear him proclaim the gospel and who support him materially and with moral support in every way they can. but there are the detractors. And I guess the lesson for us, by implication at least, is that there will always be the naysayers. Whatever we do and whatever good we try to bring to the world around us, there will be opposition. Well, opposition, again, rears its ugly head as we're in the 20th chapter. And let's look at verse 1 of the 20th chapter. After the uproar ceased, well, we have to talk about that uproar. And for those who weren't with us last Wednesday, or just by way of a refresher, that uproar was the big riot in the city of Ephesus. And the riot started because people were so vehemently opposed to the preaching of the gospel of Christ. This wasn't really a religious opposition. This wasn't because people thought that Paul was proclaiming a false gospel or that he was blaspheming the native religion in Ephesus, which was a polytheistic religion, in other words, many gods in the Greek classical tradition. Just what they call a pantheon, a whole host of gods with a small g, but because of economic interests. We remember the silversmith. His name was Demetrius. The writer of Acts saw fit to memorialize the name of Demetrius because he was really the ringleader of the riot, and it was all economic. The silversmiths, Demetrius appears to have been the head of the silversmiths guild, had a really good living by making little religious trinkets. I'm guessing some of these would have been little replicas of that great temple to the goddess Artemis or Diana, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world in Ephesus. Some of the ruins are still visible in that great city today, but it was because they saw danger to their income, to their money. And so they started a riot against Paul. And when we go back and look at that, and one of the little sidebars in Acts 9 is that when this massive screaming mob was wanting to basically tear Paul to pieces physically, he wanted to go into the big theater, that theater that would seat, they estimate 25,000. That's a big place. That would seat the entire population of McMinnville 2 times over with room to spare. A huge theater, and he wanted to go in there. This mob was so agitated that they kept screaming for 2 hours, the text says. I mean, they were really worked up. And Paul, of all things, wants to go in there and speak to them. Well, the text tells us, no, the disciples told him, Paul, you can't do that. You can't have this. It's crazy. This is madness. My theory, it's Bill's theory, the text doesn't say it. I think that he was going to go face that mob at the risk of his own life and a very violent and cruel death because he saw an opportunity to preach Christ. I can't figure any other reason. I don't think he would have gone there to defend himself. Well, that would have just stirred him up more. He went in there, he wanted to preach Christ. And as we've seen in following Paul's travels earlier in Acts, anywhere he went, if there was a crowd gathering or a crowd might be gathering, he wanted to be there to preach the gospel. So we talk about motivation. Nobody takes a back seat to Paul in terms of motivation. Well, okay, we got that little bit of history cleared up. After the uproar ceased, Paul sent for the disciples, and after encouraging them, he said farewell and departed for Macedonia. Now, in Ephesus, he's over here, what is Anatolia, the province, now modern-day Turkey, and in the most western part of where Anatolia projects out
going westward into the Aegean. And this, of course, one of the churches that's addressed in a letter that Paul later writes, and there were issues at Ephesus, and he was concerned about it. There were also issues at another church that he had planted back on the Greek mainland in Corinth, and that will have a factor in what happens now. So let's follow and see what he does here. After the uproar ceased, Paul sent for the disciples, and after encouraging them, he said farewell and departed for Macedonia. In other words, he's going back westward across the Aegean. When he had gone through those regions that had given them much encouragement, he came to Greece. What we're talking about here is actually started out in Macedonia, in the northern part of modern Greece. And then he had earlier, as we'd read in earlier chapters, he was down in the more southern part of what was called Achaia. And there he planted churches. I want us to notice two words that come across loud and clear in my English translation. I have the English Standard Version. Back up in verse 1, after encouraging them, he said farewell and departed for Macedonia. And when he had gone through these regions and had given them much encouragement. We're going to see, and we have seen earlier in our study in Acts, that Paul never forgot about reinforcing and taking care Green light's on. Okay, we've got sound. Oh, I love it. Much better, much better. Thank you, Brother David. Thank you so much. That just makes it a lot easier. So that's what Paul is doing here. Remember those two words, encouraging and encouragement, up here in the first couple of verses. There, in verse 3, he spent 3 months, and when a plot was made against him by the Jews as he was about to sail for Syria, that is, he's going back to Jerusalem, he's going back to Palestine, and he was planning to sail. Of course, the easiest way to do it would be across the eastern Mediterranean, and he was going to sail. That would be faster and much easier. He decided to return through Macedonia. Sopater, the Berean, son of Pyrrhus, accompanied him, and of the Thessalonians, Aristarchus and Secundus, and Gaius of Derbe, and Timothy, of the Asians, Tychicus and Trophimus. These went ahead and were waiting for us at Troas, but we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread, and in 5 days came to them at Troas, where we stayed for 7 days. Now, if you're having a little trouble sorting out all the stops and all the cities that Paul visited during this time in the third missionary journey, well, so am I. I'm having a hard time figuring it out, because actually you're sort of going back and forth in these places. But what's happened here, he was planning to go back to Jerusalem. He wanted to be there for the feast of the unleavened bread for Passover. You can't blame him for that. He is a Christian evangelist, a Christian missionary, but still the Jewish tradition, the Jewish culture is very, very strong in his life. And he is going to honor that tradition. Point 2. If he went to Jerusalem, at what time of the whole year would the population of Jerusalem be the biggest? When else during the year would he have a larger audience to preach the gospel of Christ? It would be at Passover, because that's when the Jewish pilgrims came in. As a matter of fact, Jewish pilgrims in the area where he was preaching, in Anatolia and back in Macedonia, they would be finding a ship, and probably, my guess is, the text doesn't say this, but my guess is they would probably try to find a cargo ship, and these were cargo ships, these weren't necessarily passenger ships, that they would want to find fellow Jews to make that journey, just because I think they would be more comfortable in the company of the co-religionists. Well, this was Paul's original plan, but he gets word that there's a plot against his life. And if he was on one of these cargo ships, it would probably be the easiest place to assassinate a rival or an enemy, and maybe throw the body overboard at night, and people got up the next morning and they're all having breakfast, and they start looking around, well, where's this man Paul? Well, it would be an easy way to get rid of a troublesome Christian missionary. Well, he gets word of this, so he decides that he's not going to take that sea journey, but he's going to go on foot. Now he's going back into Macedonia. I know it's complicated. I can't figure it out either. But at some point he does sail. He sails out of the port, basically the port, the Aegean port that serves Philippi, and he sails out and he goes back to Jerusalem. Here's the problem. He has been collecting money from the Gentile churches to send back to the impoverished saints in Jerusalem. They had fallen on hard times. And it's one of the most remarkable things, I think, in the history of organized religion, that these Gentiles, who seem to have never gotten along with the Jews, are accepting a brand new religion, which first looks like a splinter sect out of Judaism. There are these Jewish converts back in Jerusalem. You might call it the mother church if you want to, because that was the nucleus, that was the That was the source from which Christianity spread. And these Gentile converts who never saw these people, didn't know them, didn't speak their language, they were united by a common faith in Jesus Christ. They opened up their checkbooks. Of course, they didn't have checks then, but or what we would recognize as a check. They opened up their money bags and put coins in to send back to the impoverished Christians in Jerusalem. Such an act of love and faith. And you know, we tend to do the same thing today. And I've got to say that it's personally a source of great satisfaction, and I guess you might say pride, that the Christians who meet in this community and in this church have been extremely generous with other people that we will never see, that we will never know. We don't know their names, but in other parts of the country and other parts of the world, by supporting them in their times of distress and affliction. Central, as you know, just made a very substantial donation to help out people stricken by those catastrophic floods in the hill country of Texas. And I think I can see, and you know, I think I can say without fear of successful contradiction, that when a human need comes to our attention, this church responds. We are doing exactly what those first century Christians were doing. Those Gentile converts in Macedonia and in Anatolia, they didn't know anything about the people in Jerusalem. They just knew there was a need. And they knew the lessons that Jesus had taught about taking care of the weakest and the most vulnerable, the sickest, the most distressed, the most downtrodden among us. They responded to it. Well, the problem, I said, before I got off on a little sidetrack here, the problem was Paul has bags of money. So if he's going to make the foot journey back in the old direction to, you'd know somebody would call. That's a telemarketer. Yeah, that's a telemarketer. Yeah. You can't get away from them. I think it was yesterday I had 5 of these calls before I got out of the driveway on my way to work. Once they bite into you, they don't give up. But the problem was he's carrying all this money, and if he takes the foot journey back, the highways, which really kind of cow paths, more or less, were just ridden with highwaymen, these robbers that lay in wait on the highways, see anybody they thought might have a couple of coins on them, they'd knock them in the head and steal their purse. Here's Paul with tons of money. So when Luke mentions these people that we don't otherwise know anything or much about, this Sopater, the Berean son of Pyrrhus, Aristarchus and Secundus, Gaius of Derbe, all these people, I'm going to guess that these people were sort of a bodyguard. These were sort of an escort. This was probably not all of them. I think Luke just mentions a few of them here. But Paul would certainly need an escort carrying all that money. Well, the money got to Jerusalem, so praise the Lord for that. In that, his mission was very successful. These went on ahead and were waiting for us at Troas, but we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread. That city named Troas, Troas, you may in some translations see that rendered as Troad, Troad. Okay, now this is in the westernmost projection of Anatolia, just as far out in the Aegean for connected land for Asia Minor as you can get. What does that name suggest to you? Was that place known by a different name at an earlier time? Now we're about in the mid-50s AD here. Troas, does that ring a bell with you? I think Terry knows. Okay, Troas. That's the site of the ancient city of Troy, the site of the Trojan Wars. It is immortalized, of course, in the works, the words of the Greek poet in the Iliad, that great epic that's come down to us more than 2,500 years ago. But this was the site of Troy, ancient Troy. Now there have been archaeologists and historians for decades been trying to kind of unearth some of the ruins of ancient Troy and say without any doubt, okay, this was Troy. I'm not sure if they've succeeded. That'd have to be determined at a much higher pay grade than mine, but it sure looks like the ancient city of Troy. In other words, they had been there for a very, very long time. But anyway, in the mid-50s AD, it was still a very important trading city, and there were a lot of people there. Okay, now, the next panel, as they say in Acts 20, is the story of Eutychus. Now, I don't know if anybody in here, I'm not asking for a show of hands, if anybody in here knows anybody, maybe somebody in your family named Eutychus. I don't. I don't think that's a very popular name, but Eutychus has been memorialized for all eternity in the words of Luke in Acts. And if there's one thing I can say about the story of Eutychus, it's a message to preachers. It's a message to preachers. Don't preach too long. You know, have a little consideration for your audience, okay? Let's see what happens to Eutychus. On the first day of the week when we were gathered together to break bread, now this was not, we say breaking bread, we think of communion, Holy Communion, the Lord's Supper. This wasn't it. It actually turns out to be kind of a late night snack. On the first day of the week when we were gathered together to break bread, Paul talked with them, intending to depart on the next day, and he prolonged his speech until midnight. Well, he knew he was leaving the next day, so he had a lot to say, and he had to get it all out. He prolonged his speech. I love this translation, his speech until midnight. There were many lamps in the upper room where we were gathered. When he says we, Luke was in the group. So Luke, very faithful and accurate and meticulous chronicler of these events, he saw all of this. He was a first-hand witness. And a young man named Eutychus, sitting at the window, sank into a deep sleep as Paul talked still longer. And being overcome by sleep, he fell down from the third story and was taken up dead. But Paul went down and bent over him, and taking him in his arms, said, "Do not be alarmed, for his life is in him." And when Paul had gone up and had broken bread with them, he conversed with them a long while until daybreak, and so departed. And they took the youth away alive and were not a little comforted. Eutychus just went to sleep. I don't know, maybe he'd worked a double shift at McDonald's. I don't know. But for some reason, he wasn't really up to hearing a speech that went on till midnight. So the young man, and I can kind of understand, maybe he wanted to get some fresh air, so he was sitting in the windowsill. Remember that it was centuries before you had glass in windows. And he just fell asleep and toppled 3 stories down and hit the stone pavement below. And everybody rushed down. Paul was doing this preaching, and of course this shocking event happens. Everybody's just frightened and dismayed, and they go down and they find him dead. And Paul runs down, kind of reminds you of Elijah in the Old Testament. And Paul runs down, throws himself on this young man, grabs him in his arms. And the thing that's missing in this narrative is what Paul said to the young man.
Don't you wish you knew? Don't you wish you knew? I think, and I've said many times before, I think what God gives us in His holy word is what we need to know, maybe not what would satisfy our human curiosity. I'm just guessing He said something to him. Because we've seen this kind of thing in other miraculous revivals of the dead. But anyway, Eutychus falls asleep and falls to his apparent death 3 stories down. And it's interesting that even though we had this very shocking and disruptive event, after Paul gathers him up and holds him and embraces him, all this, he goes back upstairs, and the rest of the congregation following up the stairs, and he keeps on preaching. Now, this was midnight, and he preaches till daybreak. He had a lot to say. In verse 13, but going ahead to the ship, we set sail for Assos, intending to take Paul aboard there. And this is Luke talking, for so he had arranged, intending himself to go by land. This is where he had to change his plans because of the plot. And when he met us at Assos, we took him on board and went to Mytilene. This is south of Ephesus. And sailing from there, we came the following day opposite Chios. The next day, we touched at Samos, an island. And the day after, we went to Miletus. I'm sorry, that's that city, that port city south of Ephesus in Anatolia. For Paul had decided to sail past Ephesus so that he might not have to spend time in Asia, for he was hastening to be at Jerusalem, if possible, on the day of Pentecost. So Paul is traveling again. He just can't stay put very long. And when he is put, he's working. He stays put. He's working. He's not resting. He's not taking a vacation. He is working. We still have sound. Oh, okay. All right. I guess the takeaways here are Paul's commitment. It seems like he is as committed to encouraging and sort of building up the Christian converts as he is in building new churches. Now, I don't know, maybe there's a message in that for Christian churches today. We seem to be focused on missionary work and creating new churches, and that's great. That's what Paul was doing. That's the example that God puts in front of us. But no less important, I would argue, is maintenance, the spiritual and institutional maintenance of the church. This is important because we tend to, just like our bodies, we age, we sort of decay. We're not as strong, vital, robust as we were at an earlier age. The same thing happens spiritually if we're not taking care to nourish and encourage and support the spiritual life that's in us. So, sort of the takeaways, I think, and there are always some lessons that we can know. It's about 7 after, according to the official Central Church of Christ clock. So maybe that's a good point to end. Just a little personal thought, a little aside. I don't know if you were watching yesterday evening. They televised it. I thought that was pretty bold since they'd had so many spectacular failures before. But the SpaceX Starship, the biggest rocket ever made, and they had tested the Starship. Apparently, there were several of them in the stock room. These things are 300 feet tall, and they had a launch. They were sending up some simulated Starlink satellites. I think 10 of them was that number. The mission went great. Everything was fine. Had a little trouble on the re-entry, but anyway, they got these simulated satellites all deployed. And I thought that was kind of interesting because you could actually see it. They had a camera in the service capsule, and it was pushing these big metal plates out. And one of the commentators said it looked like a Pez candy dispenser with a plunger. You know, you push one out at a time. That's exactly what this thing was doing. And the technology, and the video showed this clearly, the technology showed what amounts to, some of you will relate to this, a sprocket and chain drive system. Now, if you have a bicycle, or if you had a bicycle, you dealt with the sprocket and chain drive system, right, Brother Dennis? So this is technology that's maybe as much as 200 years old, and that's what they were using. I am amazed at the engineering prowess and expertise and competence of these people that make all these tens of thousands of parts work harmoniously and work together, and this thing actually worked and did its job. Here's the point. One of the camera views as the Starship was in its ascent phase, you can see the curvature of the Earth. And you know, we haven't seen those pictures in quite some time, because the last time we visited the moon was, I think, in 1973, you know, humans flying around the moon, and we just don't see these things all that often. And I thought when I saw that, and you couldn't see much of, you know, beyond, this was low Earth, just as a matter of fact, they hadn't even achieved low orbit. But seeing the curvature of the Earth, and I just brought to mind the words of the psalmist David. And I just couldn't get it out of my mind. And I thought that little shepherd boy, when he was just little David, and he would be out guarding the sheep flocks at night, and in this part of the world, they didn't, obviously, millennia before electric lighting, and there wouldn't even be torch lighting out here in the darkness. The only light would be if the moon was shining and there were no clouds. Otherwise, the only thing you could see in the sky was the stars. And we can't do that here today. That's why when they build telescopes, optical telescopes, they go to Chile and go way up high in the highest mountains to get above the haze and all the grit and dirt in our atmosphere so they can have a clear shot. Little David, when he was a shepherd boy, he could see this without all the industrial pollution, air pollution we have nowadays. And he looked up in the sky. And I think night after night, and he looked at this, and I really think, this is Bill's opinion, I think this was part of the inspiration for what David wrote in Psalms. If you want to check this out, Psalms chapter 8. Psalms 8, starting in verse 3. And this is what the psalmist says: "When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you care for him?" And I think as I see, you know, these just dazzling images coming back. We've had the Hubble telescope for many years, and the James Webb Space Telescope, and now we're getting the Vera Rubin telescope, the biggest digital camera in the world. And we see these pictures, and then we turn back and just in a time of introspection, we look at ourselves, and we are so insignificant in terms of our physical being in comparison with the humanly incomprehensible vastness of space. And David pondered this, and he asked God, what is it about man that you are so mindful of him? Why is it that you're concerned about man? I think that's a question for us today. I think the question was answered when the Messiah came into the world, when Jesus Christ came into the world in the form of man. God is saying, yes, God is saying that I, the creator, the architect, the engineer of the whole universe, they call it the firmament in the old translations in Genesis, the firmament. Yes, I built this, and I manage this, and I control it, and I keep everything running on schedule. But I'm mainly concerned about people. And I think that's what God is saying here. And David, you can't help but think about that little boy lying out there on his back. Nobody else around. He can hear the bleating of the sheep. And he's looking up in the heavens and he's saying, God, why do you care about us? Why do you care about us? Well, anyway, we are totally out of time. I appreciate your attention. Visitors, come back anytime. You're always welcome. You're always welcome. As we say, if you're not satisfied with the program, we will cheerfully refund the price of your admission. Okay. By the way, a very nice person brought us some Warren County homegrown tomatoes, and I think Carol and I and Teresa, we got out some, and I got out a couple. There's still plenty left there in a plastic sack back there on the credenza in the foyer. Just help yourself. I don't want to have to haul off any leftover tomatoes tonight, okay? But they're homegrown tomatoes, so just help yourself. Well, thank you for being here, and hope to see you again next week. Next week is a little bit of a question for me. I want to let you know right now. I think I have a medical appointment out of town Wednesday afternoon, but we'll let you know if it looks like I won't be able to be back. But anyway, for the auditorium class, Cody is due to be back here next week. So thank you all. Have a good night.
Good evening. Good evening, good evening. I hate to break up this fine fellowship. We are so glad that you have joined us for a midweek Bible study. If you are visiting with us, we are especially glad that you are here. For those wondering, the invitation song is going to be number 860. 860. I don't know about y'all, but it's been one of those days. I'm ready to go home and go to sleep. I think y'all can relate to me. I see some of y'all smiling and laughing and already nodding your heads thinking, man, Luke, you keep talking, I'm about to go to sleep. But tonight, I would just like to read Psalm 23. I encourage you to follow along. If not, I would encourage you even more to just listen. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for His name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for You are with me. Your rod and Your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. As much as I love physical rest and going to sleep at the sweet hour of 9:30, I want more, so much more, for spiritual rest in heaven. I'm so excited for that day when I just get to see my God and my Jesus, and I get to be in their presence for all eternity. I cannot wait for that rest. Rest from everything that's wrong in this world. Rest from all the pain and sorrow and troubles, all the long days at work, and all those long days with dealings with coworkers and all kinds of other stuff that we all go through. I can't wait for that day, and I'm sure that you can agree with me. Perhaps tonight you'd like to come forward, perhaps you need prayers, or maybe you'd like to put Christ on in baptism, whatever it may be. We ask that you come forward as we stand and sing.
There is a habitation built by the living God for all of every nation who seek that grand abode. O Zion, lovely Zion, I long thy gates to see, O lovely Zion, lovely Zion. When shall I dwell in thee? A city with foundations firm as the eternal throne, nor wars nor desolations shall ever move a stone. O Zion, lovely Zion, I long thy gates to see, O lovely Zion, lovely Zion. When shall I dwell in thee? Within His pearly portals, angelic armies sing with glorified immortals. The Please be seated.